Let's get started. This is a class that's way too long, but we'll try to do as much as we can in 90 minutes. We may not make it through all the slides. I've got 114 slides or something. So we've got a lot to talk about with this. So today's topic is how people talk to AIs and how AIs talk back to them. So that's that. But first, AI news of the day. And this was an interesting story I ran across just the other day about an AI system being used to discover new drugs. And what's so interesting about it is that it's classic AI. It's old-fashioned AI in the sense that they use a knowledge graph rather than fancy machine learning techniques. And so what's interesting about it is that the whole article goes on and it leads you to believe that it's fancy new AI neural network stuff. But in fact, if you read the paper, which is there, it's a knowledge graph-based mechanism for figuring out how drugs that are used for one thing can be used for something else. In the US, that's called off-label. So you use a drug that's, say, for treating your eyes, but you use it for your foot. So when they've discovered, using this mechanism, all these really interesting alternative uses for drugs that allow people to, with otherwise low-frequency diseases, very rare diseases, to be treated successfully. So the huge success in the AI column here. Fascinating. If you're interested, go read that paper. The other interesting chart I saw this week, I couldn't resist showing it to you. Remember we were talking last time about data bias and spurious correlations? This is the best spurious correlation I know. If on the x-axis is chocolate consumption kilograms per year per capita. So how many kilograms of chocolate do you eat? And clearly Switzerland and Germany sort of share that. They're way off to the right. And the y-axis is Nobel laureates per 10 million population. So it's a funky number. But what a great correlation, right? R is 0.791. You never get that. That's great. P is less than 0.0001. So it's clear that eat more chocolate, get more Nobel Prizes, right? The big story there is be careful about what you see, what gets told to you. Make sure you see the real data and not just, funny graphs like this. Okay, so here's where we are in terms of the course for the next couple of weeks. Last Wednesday we talked about data lifecycle. Today we're talking about how people talk to AIs and how AIs talk back. I switched things around a little bit. So tomorrow we're going to talk about recommendation systems. And then Tuesday of next week we'll talk about agent design. As you probably have heard, 2025 is the year of the agent. And so what does that mean and what does that mean for you? What does that mean for humans? We'll talk about that. And then next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow, Peter Norvig will dial in and he'll give us our lecture on how AIs do at writing code. We've talked about things like this before, but conversations with AIs are becoming increasingly common. It's part of everyday experience. And I've mentioned this to you before, but here's the link if you want to follow up on it. This is the actual chat where Watsonville Chevrolet said, we want to help you with this. And so each response is legally binding. And this is the actual interaction. So this is the person saying, I need a Chevy Tahoe. It's a big, expensive car, right? It's normally like, $50,000 car. And they said for $1, and that's a deal. And they had to sell it, right? So it's important to you and to whatever company you're working for that the chat interaction is accurate and correct, right? Now, we've also talked about this before. I want to reiterate it because it's so important, which is people go a little weird when they're talking to a computer. In particular, the Eliza effect is that people tend to believe or tend to get sucked up into the interaction. And it's not something you can control easily. We'll talk about ways to deal with it later, but it's one of those things you have to be very aware of. As a user experience designer or builder or HCI person building AI systems, you have to know this. This is a link I recommend to you next time you're sort of on the train going somewhere. It's a really wonderful podcast about the ELIZA effect. And so it's worth your time when you're going somewhere. So Cliff Nass is a guy I knew at Stanford, was probably the leader in a lot of this work. He did a bunch of work in how people would respond socially to voice interactions, even though they know it's computer generated. This is the ELIZA effect on voice. So in a series of papers and in his book called Computers as Social Actors, basically pointed out that this is something that's a social response. You can't stop it. All you can do is design for it. In particular, when people hear speech, they think of human. When they're debriefed, what's so interesting is that the subjects insisted, last quote here, they would never respond socially to a computer. I would never do that. And they would obviously deny the specific behaviors they had just done. So this is fascinating stuff because we're getting at this interesting boundary between people, psychology, and computation, AI. So I'm going to repeat a couple less slides here for you. Remember text, right? You invested years in learning how to read. You have invested years and decades learning how to read and increasing your vocabulary. And it's quite good. It's very efficient. Voice is learned more easily. But it's got this interesting other problem. Dictation is fast, but it's harder to correct, and so on and so on, right? So we have this trade-off between voice and text. You're a designer. What do you choose to do, and why? So this is now a new option for you as a UX designer. So when you're having conversations, you think of text chats, right? You do this on your phone all the time. We have this back and forth. History of conversation is visible. So it's easy to fix. And voice, we have pretty good speech reco, pretty good, and text-to-speech is also pretty good. So I don't know about you, but I've often had text conversations where I speak my part, and it turns into text and goes back and forth. One thing that's interesting here is that voice reco, one thing voice reco is not very good at yet is names. One project we had at Google, which was a medical support system, a medical chat system to support doctors, failed because it could not recognize unusual names. And so every hospital is international, it's a little UN, so we've got people with all kinds of names, right? So Schmidt is easy, but Balasubramanian is more complicated for it, right? So all of a sudden you now have to train the recognition system to reco names. And names vary a lot from place to place, so that's still a problem. So, welcome to this episode of Conversation Engineering 101, where we're going to talk about how people talk back and forth and how we can simulate that or emulate that with computations. So the question really is, how do we create one? What do we need to know? What issues must you handle? How much linguistics do you need? Answer, a bunch, right? It's not, you can't just say LLM solve this problem. That's not the solution. We'll talk about why. Now, historically, there's been a bunch of work in chatbots over the years, right? You've probably dealt with a bunch of these. So maybe you've used Siri, right? The frame is, and the frame here is important. It's the way you think about it, the way it's told to you, the way it's marketed to you. So the frame is, for Siri, it's a virtual assistant, handles voice queries, and doesn't quite do everything, makes recommendations, gives you news snippets. And so you can say things like this: what will the weather be like today? And it will give you a reasonable answer. But if you say, what will the weather be like in Wallala? What was that last word I said? Wallala? Probably not a word you've heard before. Turns out it's the name of a small town. It's a little village in Northern California. No speech recognizer recognizes that. So you have to type that part. So all of a sudden we've got this broken interaction. So you have to be a little careful about these things. Bixby was another one built by Samsung. I'm not going to show you the video. You can go watch it yourself. It did a lot of things pretty well. Again, all these systems that I'm showing you now kind of worked within a prescribed grammar of things. Even though it was told you that it was arbitrary natural language, that wasn't true. You could only say make a call or make a phone my friend or something like that. You could not make arbitrary speech and hope for it to work. Skip. The late, long lost, beloved Cortana was the Siri answer by Microsoft. It was integrated into Microsoft 365. It was front end for Bing, and it was discontinued for exactly those reasons. It never got market share. Cost a lot of money to keep it up, so they ended up saying, we're just losing money here, we're going to stop it. And this is true for all these things. The reason I'm telling you this is because this bunch of work from Amazon doesn't even break even. They're not making money on this, right? They're shipping money every box they send to you. But they view it as important for the other part of their market, for the rest of Amazon sales and so on. So they sell these things, these devices, as smart speakers. It's easier to say than Alexa or something, right? But it's basically used for music and reminders. Google Assistant, same story. This is the very first generation. This is the second generation, which had built-in image, built-in screen, and a camera with face reco. So when I walk into my kitchen in the morning, my little Google Assistant says, "Good morning, Dan." First time that happened, it was a little weird. Why are you talking to me at 5 a.m.? And when it's really dark and I haven't turned the lights on, it detects somebody moving, but it doesn't know it's me. So the screen lights up. It doesn't say anything. Remember this, because the future, the very last slides are going to be about the future of chat interaction, and it's going to be multimodal, vision being part of that. The reason I want to contrast this with Google Voice Search is Google has had for a long time this little microphone icon here. Has anybody used it, just out of curiosity? No, one person. You're the guy in Europe who's been using it. It's one of those things that we actually implemented a long time ago, and it would basically use a cloud API to call the Google Speech Reco system, hand the block of text, the audio recording, and give it back. And it worked pretty well, actually, but nobody used it. But we learned a little bit about how people would ask questions of Google through that experiment. It's still there. And the Google Assistant, part of the reason I'm telling you this is the Google Assistant and that chatbot grew out of Google Search. So it was initially oriented towards answering search questions. So you could say something like, what's my next hotel reservation? But that would be seen through the lens of Google Search. So all of a sudden, this is about personal search, right? So the folks in Google Search were not that into basically holding this long conversation. They didn't want to do conversation engineering until they were forced into it. They just wanted to answer a query. And queries are typically one or two shot and you're done. But that's the frame. That's the way people thought about the Google Assistant initially. And then historically, it broke off and became an independent unit, blah, blah, blah. We'll tell the rest of that story. Brief aside. I think the reason you're here, as opposed to watching the video, or watching someone else's video, or listening to a conversation done by Google Notebook LM, is that I've got lots of stories, and I hope you like the stories, right? Because a lot of these stories are not written down, and you're not going to find them in any textbook or any paper anywhere. So I think part of the value add for having me giving these lectures is I can tell you the history here that you're not going to find out otherwise. So when you're thinking about the Google Assistant, it really is, it's a frame of a chatbot, but it's got this search stuff integrated into it. So it was easy, for example, to pull up these images. So you could say, for example, what was the query here? I'd like to go on vacation, here's some travel ideas, here are the results. That's a search interaction. And increasingly, you're going to start to see that in chatbot interactions. Did I show you this already? No. Okay, I'm going to show you a little clip of a video, very old video, from a movie called Horse Feathers. And what I want you to watch is the way people talk together as humans. Now, this is a movie, but it's very much, it's a funny example because I like it. and it's very much like what people actually do. So watch the timing, watch the back and forth interactions and what gets said and what doesn't get said. So let's watch just a few seconds of this.
Hey, Baravelli.
What do you want?
Watch the door for a few minutes, and don't let anyone in without the password.
All right, what is it?
Swordfish is the password, do you understand?
Okay, I got it.
Well, what is it?
Password.
Swordfish! Swordfish!
Right, the
Error.
swordfish, the swordfish.
Right.
Piazza
Correction.
mascoso in the room per lo faccio due pazzi.
Multi-language.
Who are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Who are you?
I'm fine too, but you can't come in unless you give the password.
Oh, what is the password?
Oh, no, you gotta tell me. Hey, I tell what I do, I give you 3 guesses. It's the name of a fish.
Is it Mary?
That's no fish.
She isn't. Well, she drinks like one. Let me see. Is it sturgeon?
Hey, you crazy. Sturgeon, he's a doctor who cuts you open when you're sick. Now, I give you one more chance.
I got it. Haddock.
That's funny. I got a headache too.
What do you take for a haddock?
Well, now, sometimes I take aspirin, or sometimes I take a calomel.
So this is a bit old-fashioned. So he's talking, there's a lot of wordplay going on here. Happens in human conversation all the time. All the time. And this is just an interesting, funny example. So the last example here was, what do I take for a headache? Oops.
Hey, I tell what I do, I give you 3 guesses.
Is it Mary? She isn't. Well, she drinks like one. Let me see. Is it sturgeon?
Hey, you crazy. Sturgeon, he's a doctor who cuts you open when you're sick. Now, I give you one more chance.
I got it. Haddock.
That's funny. I got a headache too.
What do you take for a haddock?
Well, now, sometimes I take aspirin, or sometimes I take a calomel.
Say, I'd walk a mile for a calomel.
A calomel is an old-fashioned way to solve a headache. But the line there about walking a mile for a calomel is a reference to an old advertising jingle. I'd walk a mile for a camel. And so one of the things you have to realize is that this kind of wordplay happens, or errors happen all the time in spoken speech. Not this again. Go back again. Sorry, I want to hear the end of it.
Open when you're sick. No chance.
I got it. Haddock.
That's funny. I got a headache
we
too.
got
Sometimes
that.
I take a calomel.
Say, I'd walk a mile for a calomel.
You mean chocolate calomel. I like that too, but you know, guess it. Hey, what's the matter? You don't understand English? You can't come in here unless you say swordfish. Now, I'll give you one more guess.
Swordfish. Swordfish. I think I got it. Is it swordfish?
That's it. You guess it.
Pretty good, huh?
Fine. You guess it.
What do you want?
I want to come in.
What's the password?
Oh, you're no fool of me. Swordfish.
No, I got tired of that. I changed it.
What's the password now?
Gee, I forgot it. I better come outside with you.
It's like so many security systems I've used. So have you seen, I think I showed you this video, right? This is the OpenAI demo. So this is their OpenAI demo of their chatbot from, I guess, late last year. I want to watch just a few seconds of it. And what I want you to pay attention to is the prosody, the voice intonation, the
Hey,
back and forth
ChatGPT,
conversation.
I'm Mark. How are you?
Oh, Mark. I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Hey, so I'm on stage right now. I'm doing a live demo, and frankly, I'm feeling a little bit nervous. Can you help me calm my nerves a little bit?
Oh, you're doing a live demo right now? That's awesome. Just take a deep breath. And remember, you're the expert here.
I like that suggestion. Let me try a couple deep breaths. Can you give me feedback on my breaths? Okay, here I go.
Whoa, slow a bit there. Mark, you're not a vacuum cleaner. Breathe in.
So one thing to note there is there's no speech reco for right? Right? So what real speech recognition systems do that are deployed like this is they actually have extra annotation for what are called paralinguistic utterances. So if I click my tongue like that, that gets noted in the transcription as tongue click or laughter or shouting or whatever, right? So there's a lot of these things, and this gets transcoded as heavy breathing. So what they did is they augmented the speech recognition system with a bunch of additional stuff to recognize laughter, crying, heavy breathing, et cetera, right? So that all gets put into the transcript. So a chatbot should be dealing with those paralinguistic utterances as well. So the video goes on, you can watch it at your leisure. But one thing that's really interesting about that is that the voice quality is, shall we say, extraordinary. It has a very, I want to help you, right, kind of attitude. They got a lot of criticism for that, and also because it sounds a lot like the actress Scarlett Johansson. And Scarlett Johansson was very unhappy about this. And so they ultimately changed the voice. Although OpenAI said, oh, we didn't intend for it to sound like Scarlett Johansson. Yeah, right. Anyway, subsequent to all this, Google's Android sent out a voice search update where you can actually talk to it and do just like regular stuff. The assistant then, in parallel with all this, evolved. And let's listen to the interaction here. This is a nice demo.
When we started, we made this for everyone, so that everyone could find anything they need among the millions of bazillions of things in the world. Today, it seems like sometimes it's easy to feel like you need a little help with the stuff just in your own world. Your photos, phone, videos, calendars, messages, friends, trips, reservations, and so on and so on.
So what Google is saying to you here is we have access to your information if you want to get to it. If you want to look at your photos, your calendar, or whatever, OpenAI can't, right? Because we, Google, have access to all this information.
Wouldn't it be nice if you had some help with all that? Wouldn't it be nice if you had a Google for your world? That's why we're building the Google Assistant.
Hi, Amy. How can I help?
You just ask it what you need. Okay, Google, what do I have to do today? And your assistant understands and helps you out. You can even carry on a conversation with it. How long will it take to get to downtown Chicago from home?
Here you go.
What restaurants are there? Book a table at Cortino Restaurant.
Sure.
And the assistant is always there for you. So if you're on the road, you can ask it where to fill up. And if you're at home, you can ask it to play some music. Or if you're in a chat with a friend, it can show you what's playing tonight. It's like your own personal Google. Naturally, anything you share with it is safe.
So the interesting thing I think about that, there's two things. One of which is it will make the reservation for you. So in next week when we talk about agents, you'll recognize that it's taking action for you in the real world. Second thing is you can have it be in your chat with someone else. So if we're chatting back and forth and I say, what movies are playing tonight, it will insert that information into our chat. So it's like it's listening to you. You can always appeal to it. So it's like you've got this personal assistant listening in on your conversation.
Safe and secure. And the more you use your Google Assistant, the more useful it becomes. Remember, my byte combo is 326.
Got it.
And soon, you'll be able to access it from all sorts of places. So it will be everywhere you are. We made this for everyone.
Yeah, okay, got it. But what they're trying to do is give you this notion of this assistant that's always helping you out and knows about your personal data. So the design case for this, so let me ask it this way. What's the frame here? It's no longer this smart speaker that sits on your countertop. It's now a frame of a personal assistant as though it were a human being that knows your calendar, knows your contact list, knows your email, knows all that stuff about you. So the design case then, Google then says to the designers, we want you to be able to answer the following kinds of questions. You know, how do I get to Chicago, blah, blah, blah. But after all this work, it turns out the majority use case is to play music. Play music by Chicago, or play, set a timer for 30 minutes or something. So that was a little bit disappointing. But the other major use case is for search, classical search. So I don't know about you, but when we're sitting around having dinner, it's not uncommon for someone to say, hey, Google, hey, G, I don't want to activate all your phones. Quick aside, When this was first being demoed at Google, we have a big meeting and when they show them come on stage, everybody, sitting in the audience, and I guess Larry was demoing this. He said, "Hey, Google," and everybody's phone in the audience went beep simultaneously. So he was like, "Oh, we need to fix that." And the other thing you might not have thought about is when you say, "Hey, Google," or "Hey, Siri," if it goes out over the TV, this was a bug. This happened the first time. I think it was a nationally broadcast sporting event of some kind, and the Apple ad said, "Hey, Siri," and Siri devices all across the nation all lit up simultaneously. So imagine 1 million service requests coming in simultaneously. This is a problem, right? Because all of a sudden, the back-end servers, you don't think about this, right? The human interaction over the TV ended up causing this huge load on the servers. And whatever the next string was, which was on the TV, was this query to Siri. So that's all by the way. One of the things we found out is that people often ask these simple questions. And in particular, we did this analysis of what people were looking for. And one of the things we found is that voice queries are longer than short queries, than usual typed queries to Google. And they're phrased as questions. So the syntax, the content of that will be different. Now, you don't think about this now, but 5 years ago, this was a major problem. Here's an interesting point for you, UX people. Use changes over time. The way people talk, the way people query, all these things change. So it used to be that people go Xbox blog, and now they say, well, what's the best blog about the Xbox? Or everything from previously they query for sociology journals, now they ask, what's the best sociology journal, or what's the top 5? So when you actually look at all these goals, it turns out that these two are the most common ones. Hey, how do I make an omelet? How do I fricassee a chicken? Or people want to go to a particular known site. But task support through a chat interface are often things like reminders. We talked about that already. But now you can say reminders with a particular context. Email Lynn, or remind me to take that allergy shot in an hour. Send messages, all these sort of tasky things that people do. So it's interesting to think that a couple of years ago, people basically wrote long grammars that would recognize all these different things. And at one point, I think we had 5,000 different tasks, or 5,000 different ways of recognizing different task sets. So when you're designing something, you have this use frame, this case that you're trying to design for. And one of the things as a UX designer you think about is what are the expectations that people have of these things. So users expect their assistants, their conversational UIs, to be high performing, seamless, and have kind of a personal touch, right? The engagement problems we have are, well, how do we become confident? How do you develop trust in a system like this? How do you develop trust? And the answer is it has to work a lot consecutively, right? People need to feel like they're in control, so I don't necessarily want my chatbot to go off and make a restaurant reservation without my approval. So how much back and forth do you need to have? This is getting us into conversation design, right? Conversation engineering. If you have a task like that and the bot goes off and does something autonomously, is it okay that it just buys a bunch of cans of corn? Or do you want approval on that before it goes off and spends thousands of francs? Obviously, the concern for privacy, who gets that data, and so on. And so we found that people struggled with this. Is it a search? Is it an assistant? And so the story we were telling was complicated. And as a lesson, make your story clear from the outset. You can change the story, but beware. You want to make sure you get that right. So you want to be able to, have a good relationship with this thing. So we also discovered that a lot of use cases were hands busy, eyes free, or eyes free, hands busy. You just need voice. Okay. So when I'm in my car, for example, I want to talk to my car, or talk to my assistant in the car, I do not want to like go down and reach around for stuff. Right? Obviously, multi-language capabilities are important. That was not designed in at the very beginning. So let me tell you about one research. Did I go through this already with the India thing? No, good. The reason I keep asking is because I've swizzled around a lot of the content. I don't remember if you've already seen this or not. This is about 7, 8 years ago. We were interested in how, we at Google were interested in how people would be using voice mode on their phones in India. So set up 28 different places in India and 26 different places all across the US where we would do in detail visits and see what people are doing and what was working. And one of the things we found was that in the US, for example, 60 million people out of a US population of 318 was 60 million were speaking some other language at home, which is more than I thought. In particular, 37 million, so roughly half of that, are speaking Spanish. So you got to support Spanish, right? Of course, in India, the problems get more complicated. One of the things every linguist will tell you is that when people speak more than one language, and this is deeply true here in Switzerland, people do code switching, they do language switching all the time. You do a half German, half English thing, or half German, half French, or whatever. So an example would be, I had a hard time finding tu casa ayer, right? And that's the kind of thing that, people do all the time. And the reasons people do it are sort of interesting. So they want to amplify or emphasize a particular thing, or to show identity, right? And so you have these things like references for poetic purposes or for clarification for the user. And then there's this mysterious thing called phatic expressions. A phatic expression emphasizes your social connection, right? I might use a particular phrase to emphasize that I'm a Californio, right? I'm from this particular part of California. So I'd say, I met you on la esquina, the corner at some place, right? Everybody understands what that means in my group, but it's social identity. That's what a phatic expression is. I'm sure you all do that too. So if you think about it, you get this sort of interesting switch between local language and English. This is in US. So people use the local language, meaning often Spanish, and then in their family they use like 20% is actually in English. It depends, of course, on all the details, but this is a statistical average, right? With friends, it's roughly 50-50. Shopkeepers, you almost always use the local language. You see, this is probably your experience as well. And in other places, right, you've got an even more interesting linguistic background because India's got a ton of languages. And we see this kind of stuff in Google queries in India. You get these sort of mixes of Hinglish, right? Half Hindu, half Hindi, half English. Or words like play the song Ik Kudi, right, from this particular area. So you get lots of stuff like this. How do you deal with it? So, for example, as I said, listening to music is really common, right? How often do you listen to music that's not in your mother tongue? All right, think about that. And in the US, it's much bigger than I ever would have thought. And in this particular chart is for India. But that's amazing. That means you have to have multi-language recognition capability built into your speech ecosystem. It's not optional, because that's a 5-way split, right? The language map of India is kind of crazy. I thought Switzerland was bad. This is much worse. It's much more complicated, right? And of course, wherever you have a contact region, you're going to have the multi-language code switching behavior, and you'll also get these interesting creoles, these sort of mixes of languages coming together. So I'll show you a little bit of this.
First, realize that the search is made in a typical...
This is a video I put together about voice search in India.
Indian day. The vast majority are in English. So how well does Google support these Indian searchers? What can we do that's better? We know that users in India struggle with both their internet connection and the way they search. When older users search in English, they tend to ask full questions. And as we've found, Hindi remains difficult to type. Most users, even quite educated users, think it's hard to input native Hindi due to the complicated Hindi grammar rules. For example, some users are confused about matras, and matras are displayed on the top row are just not obvious. For conjuncts, some users forget which two letters go together to create a given conjunct. Only around 20% of all users ask the salesman to set up a Hindi input on their phones. In this case, the salesman changes the system language to Hindi, as they often believe that's the only way to input Hindi. At the same time, all users, and the vast majority of salesmen, think that the default Hindi input is very difficult to use. A major issue is that the vowel signs are behind the difficult to discover long press. It's hard to use even after a demonstration. Keys behind the pop-up get pressed by mistake and the click target is just too small. There are lots of errors. And many searchers just don't really know how to use a Hindi keyboard. We found that 5 out of 6 users are unable to figure out how to change between keyboards.
लैंग्वेज कौन सेलेक्ट करें वहाँ टच कहाँ यहाँ पे सर्च करते हैं ना हाँ आप लेकिन ये तो हिंदी में आ रहा है हाँ तो हिंदी में तो करना है आपको इम्पैक्ट एमएनसी का मेरे को इसका हिंदी वर्जन ढूंढना पड़ेगा
अच्छा तो आप मतलब आधा हिंदी में टाइप करना चाहते हो और आधा इंग्लिश में?
नहीं जो हम टाइप करते हैं ना तो यहाँ पे इंग्लिश में आता है
अच्छा सपोज कि थोड़ा डिफरेंट आपको डिफरेंट क्वेश्चन देता हूँ एक सपोज आपको वीरेंद्र सहवाग के बारे में सर्च करना है तो आप हिंदी में टाइप करके उसको सर्च कर सकते हो अगर आप करना होता है तो कैसे करते हैं?
तो हिंदी कर लिया ना टाइपिंग नहीं मैंने नहीं किया
Instead, many users prefer to use Hinglish in their regular queries. The point-of-sale vendors have discovered it and are enthusiastic. Hindi users highly prefer the transliteration keyboard over the native Hindi keyboard. In typed communication over smartphones, Hinglish is often preferred over native Hindi and is widely used, especially in communications such as WhatsApp or Facebook. The reality of India is that it's still a large and complex market with many languages, but we have some real advantages.
ठीक है आप उसका सर्च लगाओ
Okay.
देखते हैं
Okay. सातारा काश पठार
Sorry about the focus. Sorry about the delay. But you see the problem, right? This is why you do field
सातारा
studies.
काश
Here is a map of KAA's plateau of flowers.
So query in Marathi, answer in English.
The user says they prefer the voice commands because they don't have to worry about spelling changes. And Google's recommendations are really good, so they prefer to say something and then refine their query based on Google's recommendations. Here's the good news. Our voice recognition in Indian languages is best in the world, and many users would prefer using it rather than typing anything.
भारत दर्शन भारत दर्शन बट सर ये भी मुझे हिंदी में चाहिए होगा अभी ये हमारा देश है पर ये तो इंग्लिश में आ रहा है
अच्छा आप चाहते हो कि रिजल्ट हिंदी में आए
ये हाँ ये सारा हिंदी में
Keep in mind, Google has a competitive advantage in this market.
You get the
And
idea.
we're-
So the speech reco works quite well. The thing going back and forth is part of the conversation design. It's very simple here because it's not asking for a complex interaction or refinements or anything. But this is pretty good, and it switches between languages fairly easily. So what people want from their fancy AI systems, from their fancy chatbots, is it's got to be high-performing, smart, seamless, and have a personal touch. And what I mean by that is it's got to be fast. People hate waiting 3 seconds. You know, I know you know that, but there are a lot of people who say 3 seconds, well, it doesn't matter. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. We've done a lot of studies showing that, for example, if the search results come back 100 milliseconds delayed, the click-through rate drops. 100 milliseconds, that's a tenth of a second. It's like, right? If you delay the results by that much, it all gets messed up. And in conversation, 100 millisecond delay is a big, big deal. So it also should be efficient and answer your questions and help do things, do that reliably. By seamless, what people want is an easy integration with their life and with their other work practices. So access to the calendar, access to your notes or whatever, it all has to be seamless and simple. And flexible, because as those persons said, every day is different, and a good assistant is also flexible. So I want that reflected in my chatbot. Ideally, this starts to touch on the privacy issues, but ideally you want this thing to understand you. It should know what I mean by home. And so, for example, what Google's doing right now for me is when I say, I want to go, what's the directions from here to home? Home is currently relocated to someplace in Zurich, right? Home is nominally in Palo Alto, but people move for, half a year at a time, a year at a time. So it has to be flexible in that way and understand me as a person. And ideally, you want the personality to be likable. Go ahead, design a likable personality. It's a challenge, but it's one of the things we have to think about. So a conversation is not a lecture. A conversation is this back and forth. It's a kind of discourse which has all kinds of interesting properties, including handoff. So I might ask you a question. I'm expecting an answer to come back. I hand it off, the thread of the conversation to you. Or you have something like barge in, which is the ability to break in while you're speaking and I say something, you'll stop. That's barging in. So it's important for us to realize as designers, as UX people, that speech and interaction through conversation is not just broken text. It's a completely different thing. It's not a damaged language. It's a different mode. So I want to make sure you remember this. There's this notion of a conversation and the cooperative principle. So people, when they're having a conversation, assume that they're trying to cooperate. You're trying to get something out of this together. So we are trying to achieve some mutual goal, and we agree on what that is. So a name you should remember is Charles Grice, G-R-I-C-E. So 40 years ago, he wrote this paper which outlined the conversational maxims. These are called Grice's maxims. A conversation should have quality, meaning it should exchange information that's true to the best of your knowledge. So if you lie to me, I'm not happy about this conversation, right? It should be informative but not have too much information. So you have to be true and honest and high quality and provide information but not too much and not distracting information. The conversation should have a manner to it, meaning it's clear and orderly. It doesn't introduce random topics. And it should be relevant. So it's easy to provide too much information, and it's easy to provide irrelevant information, but don't do that. So Grice noticed this in human conversations. They have high quality, reasonable quantity, they're orderly, and the information is relevant. So what we do, so that's true of conversations, okay? What we do in a conversational chatbot is for example, the Google Assistant does this thing called smart matching. So you take in the string, and how do you know when this person is done speaking? You ever thought about this? If you're talking to your phone and you say blah, 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 when does the pause count as the end of the sentence? That's called the endpoint, the conversational endpoint. And detecting endpoint has been really, really hard. And sometimes it still gets it wrong, but it's gotten a lot better. Partly, the model learns what your endpoint is. So for example, if I run all my sentences together and there's no pausable break between the sentences, then it's really difficult to determine the endpoint because I keep talking and there's no spot, right? Other people will say a sentence, pause, and then go on. So there's a certain amount of modeling of the individual spoken behavior. So anyway, what happens is that you take in this query or this statement, and one way that the processing happens is that they rewrite it, trying to figure out what needs to be rewritten. And so you end up with this basic scoring algorithm. And this is a stupid thing, but it's absolutely essential for all the language interpretation stuff. Because when an error happens in speech reco, what the system will do is to say, oh, I heard this, but that doesn't make any sense. So let me score the alternative interpretations and then rank them. So PageRank is a version of this. So Google's PageRank algorithm is basically scoring the inputs it gets and tries to figure out what the interpretation should be. For example, I want to hear something about the election in Turkey, the one last week. That gets rewritten to just that, just the election in Turkey last week. This is what people do. We don't even think about the paralinguistic utterances, the stuff. We don't process that semantically. I mean, we understand the emotion behind the affect. Or something like this. Maybe activate the lights in the, what do you call that place? The front room gets rewritten as turn on the lights in the living room. So the conversational back and forth, each parry back and forth gets translated into the most plausible, semantically coherent chunk. And you see things like this. What's Obama's wife's name? What is it? That's one utterance, rewritten to Obama wife name. And then how old is she? And what's happened here is she, the word she, the pronoun, gets tagged with Michelle Obama. Okay? So that's all in the language processing. That's not conversation. That's all the NLP process. So how do people talk to AIs? And the answer is, it depends. Like almost everything I say, it depends, and it depends on context. So part of that context is, what mode are you in? Are you talking to an assistant? Am I searching for something? Am I in the middle of leaving a message? Because I don't want to process the message as a query or a comment, right? It's something else. And so if I say to my smart system, hey, G, leave a message for my wife, tell her that I'm going to go shopping later today. That's a string of words, right? And it has to know that that second half is the message itself, right? So NLP has to hand control back and forth with the conversational model. So identifying the kind of utterance is really important. Context matters, right? If I'm in one of these modes and I need to switch to another mode, it needs to pick up on that. So mode switching is important. So this is great. I have to include these. These are actual queries we've gotten. You get a query like Mary Tyler Moore. No human says that to another human, right? I would provide context. Say, let's talk about Mary Tyler Moore, interesting actress, right? And all of a sudden you got instant context. Something like, what is the capital of Afghanistan? No context required, got it. Did the Giants win last night? There the context matters. Are you in New York City or San Francisco? Giants binds to a different team depending on which part of the country you're in. You're in Kansas? Well, I have no idea. So how old is he? You need to know who he is. Or questions like, what is the capital of Vatican City? It's a good question, right? Kind of nonsensical question, but you know. Or then you see long statements like this. I can no longer use Google Chrome on my computer. I've done everything, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on and on. We get real queries like that. We get real statements like that. Sometimes people will speak for a full minute, which is insane. And here's my favorite one. This is actually captured from the call logs. Hi, I need help, stat. Someone hacked in my computer. Here's my IP address. They're reading their IP address over them, right? So, okay, conversational user interface designer, handle that, right? And you're going to have to. It's not optional. So, so a couple quick observations, and we'll take a quick break. Language is messy. Designing conversation models is hard because of the language messiness of it. And it also changes all the time. Terminology like that slaps in the US used to mean that's a really wonderful thing. That slaps. Oh, wow. 100 years ago, the phrase the cat's pajamas meant the same thing. Or when I was young, the word bad meant good. I don't know why, but language changes and the model has to change too. Right? So politeness markers also shift, as well as descriptions of good things or bad things. But what were they 10 years ago? What are they now? And where will they be in 10 years? So if someone calls me Professor Russell, my initial reaction, since I'm from California, is like, who's that? Look around, right? So it's a nice politeness marker, right? But I don't recognize it like that. Sort of a distancing thing. So let's take our break now before we launch into the rest of the conversational UI stuff. Okay, let's get back at 9 o'clock. I want my agent to cue the music now.
Returning, as for the old reindeer that hung by his side, we flung it as far as we could in the tide. To the devil I pitch you, says Arthur McBride, to temper your steel in the morning.
Yeah, it's the what's it called? The over-reliance on numbers. So people read number from a register and go, wow, must be right. So I felt the same. Oh, absolutely right. So drop me an email and say, hey, what's that paper about? I'll send it to you. I found ancient technology. Slides. Actual slides.
I met my love
right on it, and then
here beneath the big crane standing. All the love I felt for her, it passed all
I told you I've been teaching AI since the 80s. And once upon a time
Took her sailing on the river, flow, sweet river, flow.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. It was a full
Town was mine to give her,
Really
sweet Thames flow
finally threw it out a few years ago.
softly.
Never gonna use this again.
Made the Thames into a crown, flow, sweet river, flow.
All right, this is for people who haven't already filled out this form. I put this up at the very beginning. So depending on how many responses we get, I may send it out by email to everybody. But fill it out when you get a chance. Okay, let's fast forward. So you've seen all this. Bang, 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 bang. You think I'd be able to jump there, right? Here we go. Okay, so have a quick conversation while people are filtering back in. How do we detect errors in conversation? So in particular, can you come up with an example of a dialogue that has an error in it? Any ideas? And ultimately, what kind of errors can we detect when we're talking back and forth? Like what? Yeah. Give me an example. Yeah. She's got one right behind you. Yeah.
Maybe you talk about one word which has two meanings. So I'm, for example, talking from one meaning.
Perfect.
From another.
Exactly. The grammar mistake would, for example, be using the wrong gender of an article before a noun, right? And this example would be something like we misunderstand. We're using the same word that sounds the same, but it means different things, different contexts. So you have an example?
Also, there and they are.
Yeah, right. So that's a kind of grammar example, but very different words. So an example of what you were just saying was also what are called garden path sentences. A garden path sentence is where you're listening to it, and it all makes sense, and then something happens at the end, and you go, oh, wait, I didn't understand this at all. Example. The old man's glasses were filled with sherry, right? Most of you thought, when I said the old man's glasses, thought I was talking about this, right? And then when I said filled, your brain said, wait, that doesn't make any sense. You can't fill these with anything. And when I said with sherry, you were able to, in your brain, unwind the binding of semantics and say, oh, he meant the other kind of glasses. And garden path sentences are a nice example of that. But you get garden path paragraphs. Has this ever happened to you? You're talking to somebody and you're having a long back and forth conversation, and then after 5 minutes you go, oh, wait, that's the wrong Dan. I thought he was talking about the other Dan, right? And I realize now you were talking about Dan Smith, not Dan Russell, right? So that's a garden path paragraph. So this kind of stuff happens in conversational UIs too. So here's an example of, this is the CoinDesk chat buddy, right? And so you can see the transcript here. It says, what's the current price? It looks it up, it goes back and forth. And at this point, the person says, thanks. And the chatbot says, I didn't get that. Can you say it again? That's a dumb failure, right? That's not hard. But you even see, simple mistakes like this erode trust. So get the simple stuff right. Another kind of common error you see is that chatbots are unable to recognize the terms of the conversation. So the chatbot says, how can I help you today? The person says, can you take refillable water bottles into the venue? And the chatbot says, I have no events at the moment. Can you take water bottles in? So it's a general question about the venue at the Royal Albert Hall in London. That's what this chatbot is for. So it's a general question, right? Anyway, they go back and forth like this, and we don't allow, this is great, we don't allow dogs in the premises. How much confidence do you have in this chatbot now? 0, right? Because all of a sudden it's talking about random things. So it's violating conversational coherency, Grice's maxim, be relevant, right? That's not relevant. Another kind of failure mode that's unique to text chatbots is the overuse of emojis. So I don't know about you, this looks terrible. Also recognize that different audiences will see this differently. And God help you if you put an eggplant emoji in there, right? Just don't do that. So among other things, you have to understand what your audience hears and sees and believes. So I think this is very junky, so I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't recommend that. And then WeatherBot, I mean, these are all real examples. I'm not making any of these up. Is it going to rain? Warm yet, right? Right? It's not helpful. It's violating one of Grice's maxims. Be relevant. So I know they're trying to be cute here. It's not working. More generally, it's really hard to do humor. It's really, really hard to do humor. When I was at Google in the search group, I remember Marissa Meyer said, I want you guys, set up a whole team, like 10 people, I want you to make Google funny. And after wasting basically 10 person years, finally said, no, forget it. It's too hard. Right? So humor is very hard. And how errors are handled is crucial to establishing trust and confidence in the system, right? So the basic model of a conversation is between two people, A and B. You set up a channel, set up a common ground. Here the context is that they're hungry. So you then have a back and forth commit. So this is how people talk, right? And you talk about a pizza place and you construct a shared notion here. You might then resolve that, evolve what's happening, converge on some anticipated meeting, and fix it. So has it just opened? You need to do repairs, right? And then you get to the conclusion, the transaction. And so this is sort of the basic model for conversational UIs as well. But remember, error events are not the same as users misbehaving. Users misbehave too. They misbehave all the time. I was just down this morning at the tram stop, and there's some little kid there by the ticket machine, and he was poking. I thought, what's he doing? He's doing all kinds of random things. And I finally figured out he's trying to find the most expensive ticket. But the chatbot would have seen that as really weird errors, right? And so it took me probably a couple of minutes to figure out, what's the longest, most expensive route he could take, right? And so when you see different kinds of errors, you have to have different resolution strategies, right? So users are generally cooperative, and they initiate repair on their own. However, not always true. I think I told you about the Microsoft chatbot Tay, which they launched, I think, 3 years ago now. And they had it learning from the conversations that people would have. And so they would, as Tay interacted with people, it would incorporate things that they said into its knowledge base. And after about 72 hours, it became incredibly violent, incredibly racist, incredibly sexist. And they had to take the whole chatbot down. And they didn't do that again, right? So be careful when you've got these things, because you will have spammers and people who misbehave. And so users have intent. Even the people who are trying to convince Tay to be sexist, they have the intent of that. You need to make sure that your intent, your system's intent, and the user's intent align. Really difficult one is implicit intents. So for example, in conversation at the dinner table, I might say, hey, can you pass me the salt? The surface form of that sentence is a yes-no question. That's not my intent. So if I say, can you pass me the salt? And you say yes, I'm going to be annoyed, right? And we do this all the time. People will do this with chatbots, right? So it's our job to figure out what the real intent is and not just say, that's an invalid question, right? So what this means is that when people will see a prompt in a chatbot, an important thing to incorporate into your chatbot is timeouts, because conversation is a real-time thing. It's a real-time behavior. So timeouts, if you give the initial prompt and nobody answers, you might say, hey, are you there? Just check. But you have to be able to recognize when people are not there. Another aspect of real-time chatbots, spoken language chatbots, is this notion of bargain I talked about before. So if, for example, my Google Assistant is giving me a long string about something, it's talking on and on and on, I want to say, wait a second, tell me the weather. I didn't want to know the whole history of post-Napoleonic Central Europe armaments, right? Just stop. So that's bargain, the ability to interrupt the conversation that goes back and forth. So the thing I want you to take away from this is that there's this kind of layer on top of the conversation about having to do with timing, because what will happen a lot is that you'll be in the middle of a conversation and the other person disappears. Has this ever happened to you in texting with somebody? They just disappear for a while? Yeah, happens all the time. You can't get mad about it. Same thing is true here. The conversational UI has to have a real-time model so it knows he's not there anymore, so deal with it. And this leads us into pivots. A pivot is a strategy that you do when something has gone slightly wrong, okay? So when the AI system does not have an exact answer, you do a pivot. For example, a no pivot, you just say, I don't know. A short pivot to say, here's an alternative answer, and a long pivot, which would be, here's an alternative answer with a long explanation. You, as the conversation designer, need to figure out which of these is appropriate, right? So we've talked before about overconfident AI systems that will tell you the answer even if they're not sure. Please, for my mother's sake, right, make sure your conversation UI that you build reflects the real state of understanding that the system has. If you don't know, say so, right? Don't try to fake it. So short pivots are typically what people want when they get in a jam like this. So the null pivot here is, sorry, I just did not help. Would you like to know a related question? Long pivot would be, I can help you with a related similar question. But one thing to note is that, does anybody here remember Clippy? Clippy, you've probably heard about Clippy. Yeah, okay, a few people. They don't look that old. So Clippy was a little conversational agent that Microsoft built into Word and a lot of Office products. And so this little animated paperclip would show up. And it would often say things like, I see you're trying to write a letter to your mother. No, I'm not. Leave me alone. And part of the problem here with Clippy was it was imprecise. And so it would always do a short pivot like this. So it would watch what I was writing in, say, Word, and say, oh, you're trying to write about this. And then it would say, do you want me to do this? It would give you a pivot, a possible continuation. And it was widely hated. And the reason it was widely hated is almost always those related questions were just way off topic. They were wrong. And so they finally deprecated it, but only after several million people got really pissed off. So ambiguity is, I'm going to skip over this. This is fun, but I'll let you watch it on your own. The point of this whole Star Trek episode was Scotty gets in a conversation with a computer and it's uncertain what it's talking about. So it's one of those errors where it's a garden path sort of conversation. So pivots and have there's strategies for these things. So a rapid reprompt is basically say, I didn't understand what you said. What did you mean? So people do this all the time, right? Another pivot would be to say, hey, can you re-say that question? What time is it? What time would you like to book this for? Getting more details. Or be ready for questions about the question, okay? So this is the kind of thing, as a conversational designer, you need to be able to handle those kinds of meta questions. I don't know what you mean here. Or being proactive. Now this is what people do in reality, I've got your name and email. All I need now is the phone number. So filling in information is needed. So this is the chatbot saying, oh, I don't quite have enough information. Let me get additional details from you. So I do want to show you this. This was from a study I did about somebody using an Android. And what I want you to watch here in this short clip is the timing of the conversation. What? Oh, it's fine.
Human conversation has evolved over
You've
eons
seen
to
this.
be highly
So, remember I talked about
Timing is
endpoints?
everything.
Call Liz.
Wait.
Okay.
Wait. Looking for an endpoint.
Okay, Google, call Liz.
Totally missed it. You see what I mean about a couple seconds?
Okay, try it again. See if you can make it work this time.
Okay, Google,
Notice that she speaks louder. This is another common response.
call Liz.
No phone number saved.
Okay, so it worked.
Okay, Google. Email Dan Russell. Number 1. Hi, Dan. This is killer. Oops, why did it?
So she said, hi, Dan, and paused to figure out the next thing to say, and thought it was an endpoint.
Oh, but when I go in here, it takes me out of the voice.
If you're
I
lucky,
have to do hi, Dan, comma.
and you're working with a conversation system, it will have all this stuff already working.
Okay, Google, send a text to Liz.
So it took that as a query, a misinterpretation.
Okay, Google,
Louder.
send a text message to Liz.
No phone number saved.
Yeah,
That was annoying.
That's right. Okay, try it one more time.
Okay.
You kind of have to.
Probably spend it.
You kind of have to just talk.
Yeah.
You can't pause.
You
Because when you
can't.
pause. So I'm going to skip forward here. So she picks up a lot of lessons along the way. So she's not saying anything now. The video is playing. She's sitting there waiting for something to happen. So this sort of back and forth timing, not in Grice's maxims, but it's fundamental to making this stuff work.
Why did it not want to?
You can go watch it. Yeah, there's that. And barging in, like I said, is absolutely critical. I want to show you this little video here. This is me interacting with my assistant.
Okay, Google, what's the closest restaurant to me?
I found a few places near
Okay,
you.
Google, stop.
Too long. You see the point? Your engineering has to be right on
Okay,
top of
Google, play music by Vivaldi.
Playing Vivaldi on YouTube Music.
Okay, Google, stop.
that. You got the joke. Yeah, that was not the Vivaldi I was expecting, but whatever. So it's gotten better over time, but this first version was launched without real barge-in. Yes?
I'm just curious. So whenever like a conversational chat, like a chatbot,
Yep.
doesn't quite understand your query like 100%, but it maybe like understands like 80% of it.
Yeah.
Is it more advisable that the chatbot just returns whatever it thinks, even though it's not absolutely calculated, or like to keep requesting for clarification and
Yeah.
how many times?
Great. Excellent question. So the question for the recording, I'm talking to you, is what should your repair strategy be when it only got 80% of the spoken phrase? So you have got a couple options. You could ask for clarification. You can do that once, maybe twice, but you can't do it 5 times, right? Otherwise, it gets really annoying. And you have to test it with your user population, because some populations will tolerate 1, some will tolerate 2, some will tolerate 3, nobody tolerates 4, right? So it depends on your user population. So a limited number of times you can ask that. A long pivot, a long re-strategizing of that would say, can you reframe the question in another way? So that's the repair strategy, is you do a pivot. That's what it's called in the field. Okay? So.
But does it usually work with people? Like,
does
do
it?
people realize that they are not really here?
Yeah, does it usually work with people? Sometimes. I mean, I would say it works probably 90% of the time, but then there are some number of people that just don't understand what it's asking. You will see this in human conversations too, where, not to tell on particular students, but I had a student last year who would ask me a question, and I couldn't parse the question. I literally couldn't understand the question. Like, I would say, what do you mean? And she would say the same thing back. Well, can you say that another way? No. Well, it's hard to move forward when there's no reformulation. And some people are just bad at that. So it's not obvious how to do it. So
Just wait for the conversation, like a chatbot to give up, or the user to give up.
at some point, yeah, you have to have a total exit strategy. Like, maybe you need to use another chatbot or something. So you have to anticipate. And part of the role of the conversational designer or conversational engineer is to figure out what that repeat strategy is. Short pivot, long pivot, how often do you want to repeat? And when do you totally give up? Oops, there we go. Pronominal reference is something all these things have to do. So the question is, how old is Obama? You get this nice chatbot answer. How old is his wife? That works pretty well. So at some point, you need to have some linguistics to figure this out. This is why LLMs are not going to solve all the problems, right? Because if you say something like this, sometimes it will get it, sometimes it won't. So you need to have a little bit of extra linguistic processing to handle that. And then this is a nice one. How old are her kids? Pretty cool. And then, of course, you get this interesting phenomenon where how old is his wife? How old is Donald Trump's wife? And it gives you 3 answers. That's not normal conversation, right? Because the default here is the current wife, right? As opposed to what the knowledge graph says, which is that there are 3. And that's currently noted which one. So the point is that there are pragmatics in conversation as well. So the default interpretation of that is how old is the current wife? So one of the ways conversation engineers work is that they will build personas. So a persona is basically a story, it's a little bio of a mythical person that represents the sort of one of the major populations of the group you're designing for. So here's Ola. She's attentive, honest, and focused. She's 38, she's female, blah, 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 all that stuff about that. The reason you do personas like this is to be able to help give your designer some help. How often is Ola going to want to answer your question? Once, twice? Suppose this is a different persona. It's Jack, and he's always in a hurry. He's really fast. He needs stuff done now. You get 1 shot for redefinition. And so the personas help you design. So this is a common technique in user experience design, really handy for conversational design in particular. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have Andrea talking about artificial persona designs. So how you can use AI to help design personas that help you design AI, if that's not too recursive. But it's building AI tools. But anyway, this knowing about persona design, this is a whole separate class, is one of the ways that we build interactions. So let's talk for a second about design priorities when you're building your chatbots. Number 1, please do this when you're designing your next chatbot. Be transparent about what the bot knows and what it doesn't know. I've said this a couple times, but it's super important. Don't claim you know everything when you don't, when your bot doesn't. When you're designing, design for now, what works now, because I've seen too many people get stuck in this trap of designing for a year out or 6 months out. The engineers will say, yeah, it will handle that, crossing their fingers. So when you're designing your chatbot, design it for what's actually working now. And ensure that the task is smooth and simple. This is why you do user testing. I've seen chatbots where the design comes through and you end up, for example, making a restaurant reservation. I needed this place at this time with this many people, and we need vegetarian food. And the chatbot repeats back everything I just told it. I want to kill myself, right? Because it just takes forever. Like, are you sure that you will arrive at 7 p.m. and stay there until 7:05 p.m.? Yeah. So test that stuff and make sure that the interaction is smooth. When you're designing a chatbot, I would say you want it to be utilitarian first. It's got to work. It's got to do the basic task. So here, for example, is a conversation with an unnamed chatbot, which is kind of going off the rails. And you see a lot of examples like this where one of the design goals is to be your friend, to be your buddy. It's cute once, it's not cute twice. So keep that in mind. Conversation stuff is particularly susceptible to that. It's fun once, it's not fun twice. It's like the joke, first time you hear it, it's funny. The second time you hear it, it's kind of okay. The third time you hear it, it's terrible, right? So it's difficult to design it, particularly in multilingual environments. Really tough for me to understand some jokes in German. I understand all the words, but I don't see why it's funny, right? So I want to give you a couple case examples before we wind up for today. If you're a conversation engineer, you're designing these CUIs, what you want to do is make sure you understand what the point of the whole thing is. That sounds stupid, but I've seen examples where people are, well, define a chatbot, it should just work. Like, for what exactly? So be clear about what the point is. Be sure to set clear boundaries on what the bot can handle, what it can't handle. Make the interaction feel as human as possible, not because you want to anthropomorphize, but because that's the mode in which people understand conversations really well. And recognize that these things will continuously change. So you will be continuously optimizing your chatbot's behavior. The data that's driving it underneath will be different. And people will shift as well. So the language will change over time. Give you a couple examples. Here's a good one. I've got a couple positives and a couple negatives. So AirAsia's chatbot the problem was that they had lots of people calling in. They just needed to make reservations. And so they built this one called Virtual All-Star that actually handles about 80% of the queries and is available 24/7, which is really great. It's multiple language, so they did all that stuff right. Nice example. Very specific. The intent is very clear. Handles that quite well. Oops, I wonder what happened there. Bank of America, I use this one. It's called Erica. It's a chatbot that answers fairly straightforward questions about your bank account. What's my current balance? What is it last time? And it's based on your personal data, so it actually answers really useful questions. And it's one of those cases where it's not just a simple transaction thing. It actually does a little bit of analysis and does quite well. Another good one, I've not used this one, but people do use it, love it. The Pizza Bot from Domino's. You go back and forth, makes your order, and people like this, even in preference to the Domino's pizza ordering form online, which is a surprise to me, but I guess they like the interaction. And it has a history, so you can say to it, give me the same order I had last Tuesday. Okay, done. So that's quite nice, as opposed to you having to remember it. A couple of negative examples. Too many telephone systems to mention have terrible, terrible chatbot interfaces where you basically get stuck in loops. And you can imagine how awful that is. You keep asking the same question and it tells you an answer and that's not the right answer and you can't fix it. And there's no way to bypass it and get to a human. On phones, when you get into a voice interaction, often you can hit 0 enough times that will eventually give you to a human. But these things are deeply annoying to people. And I don't know how many of you have used the Facebook Messenger bots, but they're not great either. 70% of them has failed, gone out of service after a fairly short amount of time. So the problem is that, Facebook wanted to replace customer service, and their natural language component did not work well. So if you're building a conversational UI, make sure you understand what the NLP backend can do for you and what it can't. These guys misunderstood, so when they built that, it ended up failing over to humans a lot, and they didn't save any money. And then there was British Airways chatbot, which 90% of the it seemed like 90% of the time would say, "I'm sorry, I don't understand." So this is an example where doing the short pivot and just saying, "I don't understand," repeatedly is a terrible idea. Don't do that, right? So bottom line is, not everything is a chatbot. Not everything is actually done well with conversational UIs, especially for high emotional, high stakes interactions like in hospital settings or complex things. So the Bank of America chatbot is simple, fast, very straightforward, clear what it does. If I'm doing my stock portfolio management, I don't want to talk to a bot. I want to talk to a human, okay? Or VIP things where it's important. You can look here, I put up a bunch of chatbot providers. So when you find yourself in the position of having to build a chatbot for a company, there's a bunch there, there's a bunch more, there's a bunch more, and by the time you actually get to it, there'll be 3 times as many. This is a booming field. Part of the problem for you, if you go to a job that requires you to build a chatbot, you have too many things to choose from. You really have a million things to choose from. So you've got to figure out which one you're going to use at any particular time. So there's a whole pile of references here for you. I want to wind up with a couple of thoughts about how this is going. So Amazon introduced this thing a while ago. Its contribution to the chatbot ecology is that it's got a built-in camera. Google Home Assistant's got a built-in camera as well. But they're trying to integrate face reco, and in particular this one, they recommended that you put this in your bedroom. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm just saying, I mean, the use case was, does this outfit look nice on me? Can you recommend a different shirt for me today? And that was their proposition. I think it's gone away. Anyway, we've got different sort of ways of thinking about engaging with people, where we have a chatbot versus a knowledge base. Remember I said not everything's a chatbot? Sometimes a knowledge base is the right thing. When you're looking for a specific kind of thing, you know where it is, you can drill down very quickly. The advantage of a chatbot is the ability to integrate, pull together different kinds of information. So you can actually do this sort of very fast, informative integration of multiple sources together. Another example of that. So that's the fancy Google Home device. So it's clear we're going to have large language model conversational agents. The problem for you as a conversational designer is, how do you control it? How do you get it to do the right thing? One method is, we've got pre-training, fine-tuning. When we talk about LLMs, that's the primary way of doing conversation design with an LLM, is fine-tuning and guardrails. So I want to show you, I'm going to quickly get through here, to writing guardrails turns out to be a big part of the conversation design problem. There's input validation guardrails, output filtering guardrails, behavior guardrails, ton of guardrails. That's going to be your job if you take that on. Another future aspect for chatbots is smoothly integrating with different kinds of knowledge sources. So we're already starting to see multi-agent systems, multi-model systems. For example, one that's got mathematic knowledge, like from Wolfram Alpha, built into it, or programming knowledge or something. And so you get these things like this, where in this particular case, you have not instant answers. That's really hard to read, but I'm sorry about that. What it is, it's a chatbot for a company that will put security bars over your windows. And sometimes the answers can take hours to come back. So we need to start thinking about designing chatbots that take longer periods of time than instant. How do we do that? Or integrating them smoothly into ongoing tasks like this one. I'm currently driving to this place. What grocery store is along the way? That you can do now. So adding, it's not a conversation as much as adding additional information sources. Devices, you know where this is going, all these new kinds of gadgets that do things. And preface for next week, agents. Chatbots as agents, in fact, multiple agents. Oh, I'm not going to show this to you. You can watch this on your own. But I do recommend watching it because it's like 4 minutes of a conversation. Well, I'll watch the first 10 seconds of while I'm talking.
Hello, I'm
agent.
here.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Samantha. Good morning, Theodore.
Morning.
You have a meeting in 5 minutes. You want to?
Does that sound like the OpenAI demo? It does to me. Anyway, that's why Scarlett Johansson got so unhappy. Language identification, as I mentioned, that's going to be important. In addition, we see chat UIs going towards multimodal conversations. So, for example, what's the population trend in North Korea, South Korea, and Vietnam? It could show me that, right? And all of a sudden, I don't know how to say that in words, but quite interesting. And of course, now as a designer, you're the UI guy, right? You could do something like this. Oh, everything you know about UI design now gets put in the chat context. You can put something on the display. Do you want to make it animated? Or do you want to make it static? Or you thought it would get simpler. It's not getting simpler. It's getting more complicated in a good way. So I'm going to end with this. Linguistics of the conversation are still important. Language matters. It matters a lot. Understanding pronouns, understanding sentiment, understanding all the affective stuff is important, all the pragmatics. And LLMs do a lot. They don't make it go away. So there you go.